Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. And today we're exploring the possibilities of embracing the biggest of challenges. And as our guide, I've invited Andy Dorantes, a former football player, a ski instructor who has climbed Mount Everest and is heading out to cycle through all of Europe in 90 days. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. So excited to be here.
So let's dive in. Have you always been an adventurer ever since you were a kid, or is it something that, came up later in life?
I think I have always been, but I'm just discovering it. Like
Mm.
growing up, I was always different. Like my friends would go to ballet classes and I was playing soccer. So I was always doing something different and I was always doing whatever made me happy. But throughout the years, I think I'm becoming more of an explorer because I love to see what is possible for me and just see how I can break my own limits.
Well, so tell us, like, what drove you to start? I mean, you climbed Mount Everest, you climbed Kilimanjaro. Talk a little bit more about how did that even come about? Like, how did you go from being a ski instructor and a traveler around the world to start climbing
Yeah.
mountains?
So, like I mentioned, I was a football player. Soccer
Mm.
was my life growing up, and my biggest dream was to go to the U.S. and get a soccer scholarship to play football over there. So that's what I did. And then after 2 years, I was like, okay, soccer is not fun anymore. So I want to do something else. So the first thing I did was Google schools near ski resorts, and I transferred to Idaho. Most people don't even know where Idaho is, but it's such a cool place. I transferred there, and that's where I started doing more outdoor activities like rafting, mountain biking, skiing, all that stuff. And when I graduated, I went to Canada to work as a raft guide. And then COVID hit. So I had to go back to Mexico. And I was like, oh no, what am I going to do in Mexico? And that's when I found out that Mexico has some really big mountains, and some friends invited me to climb Pico de Orizaba. It's the highest peak here in Mexico and the third highest in North America. So it's actually pretty big. But since I didn't know anything about that mountain, it was pretty easy to say, yes, I'll just go. And I remember climbing that mountain, and it was something special. Like I felt something in my body that I've never felt before. And I saw like one of the most amazing sunrises. So I think it was like a combination of all these tiny factors that made me fall in love with this sport. And then when I reached the summit, I was thinking, oh my God, if this is the view of the highest point in Mexico, I cannot imagine what it's going to be like to climb to the highest peak in the world, and that's Mount Everest. So after just climbing one mountain, I was already thinking about Mount Everest, but I didn't want to tell anyone because that's too crazy. But if something is in my mind, then I'm going to do it. There is no way I'm stopping. So after climbing that mountain, I climbed three more mountains in Ecuador, and that's when I realized that my body was pretty good at high altitude. And I was about to come back to Mexico, and I didn't have a job, I didn't have any plans. So I figured, okay, if I love traveling and I love climbing mountains, I'm just gonna combine it and climb the highest peak in every continent. Like that was just an easy choice, and I didn't really know what it was gonna take to do it, but after 2 years I did it, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Well, you once talked about that you were able to create your own reality with mountain climbing because you had no reference points. So, why was that so important that having no reference points actually was helpful?
Well, like I said, when I said I was gonna climb the highest peak in every continent, I didn't know anyone that had done it, and I
Mm.
didn't really know what it would take or how I needed to train, like all these things that you kind of need to figure out before doing something. I was like, I'll just do it my own way and see what works for me, and really ask like what's my own reality with this project and just see where it goes. And I think it's really nice to not have reference points because then you make those reference points your own, and you don't ask what is true for you, and you just want to do what other people are doing.
Mm. So it basically opened up more possibilities instead of like limited to what other people would tell you, you need to do this or you need to do that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, for example, just climbing Everest, like people say that you need like at least 10 years of experience in
Right.
mountaineering. And for me, it was like 2 years. Let's go, let's climb it. So I think that's nice because I feel like the less you know, then the more curiosity you have to explore new possibilities because no one is there to tell you how it needs to be done or how you should do it.
Well, so what happens in your body when you like challenge yourself, when you climb a mountain that's nearly too high to climb, like when you're doing something that's like tiny bit beyond what you think you can do, what occurs in your body?
I think that's when you feel most alive. And that's why I love pushing my limits because it's in those moments when you think you can't go any farther and you push beyond that. That's when it opens up a new space that you're like, man, we're alive. And it's so amazing. So I think now I'm addicted to that feeling of really pushing my body and see what is possible for it.
So is it so you have your body and then you have like your soul or your being, whatever you call it, the part that's inside you. So is it in both in your body and your soul? Like can you dive in a little bit more on what kind of fuel, how it fuels you, basically?
I think that's a good question. And I'm not really sure how to answer it. But I would say that in those moments, like everything just comes together as one. You
Mm.
know, like you're so present that you don't even care if it's your body, your being, whatever. Like everything is just line up and you're just enjoying every single moment. And you're so grateful to be on this planet that, yeah, it's just an incredible feeling. And I think that we get it once we are like out in nature with no distractors because that way it's way easier to be present and to fully experience like everything that is surrounding you.
So you once said that your body is your compass. How does that tie into this?
Well, the first bars class that I took, the only thing that I wrote in my manual was my body is my compass. Like if I listen to my body, it's gonna guide me throughout my life. And it was funny because when I was in Norway, in the middle of nowhere, I was once like stuck in a. I ran out of batteries, and my GPS didn't know exactly where I was. The map was not working anymore. So at that point, the only compass that I had was my body. So I had to follow it. And yeah, I ended up finding this tiny house with two people inside of it. So they let me come in and they gave me food. They let me charge my phone. And so, yeah, so since that moment, or ever since I heard that my body is my compass, then I started paying more attention to my body, asking questions and see what it wants to do. You know, my body is here to experience this planet, so I'm gonna try to give it everything it wants.
What happens if you don't listen?
I don't want to find out. Well, I guess that's when life is not fun anymore. If
Good
you're
point.
not doing what your body wants to do, I guess. I'm not sure.
Are you ever afraid?
Afraid?
Mm.
Yeah. So sometimes I guess it's normal to be afraid of some things. For example, if you're crossing a ridge or something, and you know if you make one step wrong, you're gonna fall either way, and you might die. That's it. But in those moments when fear comes to my mind, I just stay like super present, and I've realized that if I'm present, then fear is not an option because fear is always in our mind and it just can go and go and go over and over and over. And once you go back to the present moment, it's gone.
So is that the main tool you use, going back to the present moment when you seem to get afraid?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's been a while since you climbed all the mountaintops. So what have you been doing in the meantime? Like, what was your next? I know you were asking right after, like, what's next? What's next? So what was next after that? Before we move into where you're heading now?
Yeah, so I finished the last mountain I climbed was almost 10 months ago. So it's been a long time. And I struggled a little bit once I finished because I was like, okay, I did this for 2 years, but now what's next? So I every time I would ask that, it was just blank. Like I didn't really know where my life was heading, and I didn't have like a big project or anything, but it was just like being patient, keep asking that question, what's next, what's next, and like in the meantime, just doing things that I really enjoy. So I started getting more into cycling. So I went to Spain a couple times and just spent some time cycling around Barcelona area. And then I decided I wanted to do a half Ironman, and so I had to train a lot for that. And I just did it in June, so last month. It was in Colorado, and it was such an amazing experience. And then from there, it was like, okay, I need to come up with a bigger adventure. So that's how I decided that I wanted to cycle from northern Norway all the way to the bottom of Portugal.
So tell us more about that. So it's supposed to take 90 days. It's like 7,000 kilometers or something like that. So why that? Why there? Why bike from
Yeah.
one end to Europe to?
So like I mentioned, I started cycling, and that's something that I really enjoy. And for me, when something is fun, it's like, okay, I want to go all out, because for in my mind it's either like all out or nothing. Like either you're gonna do something big or don't even bother doing anything. So I figure like, okay, if I really like cycling, let me find somewhere that is pretty amazing where I can have a blast, and it's like it pushes my limits. So I started finding like routes all over the world, and I was like, okay, I'm doing Europe, and I was looking at like Eastern Europe or Western Europe. And when I found this one that goes from northern Norway to Portugal, like boom, it just clicked. I was like, that's the one. And then after that, I started doing more research. Of course, at that moment, I had never been bike packing before. I didn't have a gravel bike. But for me, at this point in my life, like I don't really care like how big is the adventure. Like I know that if I take the first step, then everything is just gonna come together. So that's what I'm doing with this adventure. Like I don't really know all the logistics. I just know that I have to fly to northern Norway, hop on my bike, and see where life takes me.
Well, when you talk about that, what comes up is like this trust, like you have a trust in you, in your body, in your capacities. So could you talk a little bit about that? Is that something you've trained to get, or have you always had that? Like, have you always trusted yourself?
I think I have always trusted myself, but now I'm like really confident. Like I really trust my body. I know I can ask my body to do any challenge, any adventure, and it will deliver. But I think it takes time to build that trust and that confidence, because you need to put yourself in different situations to start building that trust. Or at least that's how I see it. Like maybe you have a small challenge and then you go over it, and now you're like, okay, I can trust myself. I've been through this, and I survived. So now I can do another thing. So it's like it's building up. But for me now, I think that's my favorite tool. Just trusting myself, trusting my knowing, trusting my body, trusting everything.
Like practicing trust
Mm-hmm.
to build it. So another thing that I think you've been practicing is receiving. So one of the things that you talk about is like in the beginning, you were so amazed that people would actually gift money when you're doing fundraising for these different things. And then you started to basically open up your receiving, and you start to receive way more money from companies and people, for the whole mountain climbing adventure. So could you talk a little bit of how that changed for you? Like, what was it that shifted your capacity to receive?
Well, honestly, I think it goes back to my first bars class when I heard for the first time like what's receiving. Like honestly, before that in my life, I've never thought about like, oh, I need to open up my receiving or do this or change maybe my points of views. And I took my first bars class, and then after that, it was just like, whoa, man, this really works. Because before that, I had won expedition, and it was such a pain to get the money. Like maybe I wasn't opening up to all the gifts that the universe has for me. But after that moment, it was like, okay, I have to ask for more. I have to ask for more and be open to receive it. So that's what I did. And I mean, I'm really happy to say that 100% of my expeditions for the mountains were sponsored. So, and that's pretty amazing because I didn't have any experience. So that's when you know that you're creating your own reality, and you're not letting anyone tell you what can be done. So for me, that was, I mean, it was amazing. And for this expedition that I'm going to northern Norway, to Portugal, it's been a little bit different because I wanted to change my approach and get out of my comfort zone, because I knew that, I mean, I already know how to ask companies and stuff like that, but asking, I don't know why, it still gets me so out of my comfort zone. And I mean, I'm excited to see what shows up on this expedition and how I can uh, open up to receive the money that it's needed for this adventure.
So how are you asking for money for this one? Like, how are you asking in a different way? You're not asking companies. So if
So
somebody wanted to contribute to your biking from Norway to the end of Portugal, how do they do that?
So it's actually funny because I talked to Simone last week, and she came up with the idea of doing a GoFundMe. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do a GoFundMe because I don't want to ask for people for money. Like I don't want to make people uncomfortable. Like I'm still struggling with that. And she's like, you have to do it, like you gotta ask for it. So yeah, it's been great. So that way I've been raising money, like people can contribute to me by donating whatever they want. It can be money, or they can even share the link and see. I mean, it's so cool to know that I have like all these people that want to support me so that I can go out there and adventure. So yeah, I'm still struggling with that, but that's how people can contribute to me, is by donating to my GoFundMe.
It's funny though, you're willing to climb a mountain, right? And go to the very top without oxygen and push your body to the limits. But it does make you slightly nervous to ask somebody to contribute 10 bucks to your adventure. So what do you get is the difference? What makes it harder to ask for money than to climb a mountain?
I think it gets down to what people think of me. Like when you're climbing the mountain is not going to judge you. Nature doesn't care about anything, but
Right.
it's people's points of view that I'm making too relevant. Like I keep thinking I don't want to make people uncomfortable by asking money, but then it's like a struggle in my mind, because I'm like, I'm not forcing them. They have a choice. They can either say yes or they can say no, and that, so I'm making more relevant if they say no than if they say yes. And I
Mm.
also been aware of this, that I don't like when people say no. So I try to avoid being rejected. So that's why I don't ask. I'm still working on that.
Well, it's great because it's again a challenge. It's like this, maybe this time that's a bigger challenge than even biking because you have to actually ask for money from people.
Yeah.
Mm. So when do you head off? When do you?
I'm flying out on Sunday, so that's July 21st. And I'm spending just one night in Oslo so that I can shower for the last time, because I don't know when I'm going to shower next. And then flying from Oslo to Kirkenes, northern Norway.
Mhm.
I have to build my bike at the airport and then ride 60 kilometers north to Jakobselv. It's a small town that is the border between Norway and Russia.
Yeah.
Jump in the water, the Arctic Ocean, grab my bike, and just start pedaling south.
So how can people follow you if they want to follow this trip? Where can they see it?
So they can follow me on social media. I'm at Andy Dorantes MX, and also I'll have the live location on my website. So that's how people can see where I'm going. It should take around 90 days, so it's a long time.
3 months.
3 months,
Wow.
yeah.
Mm. Okay, so maybe we have to follow up with an interview after you've gone through all of Europe and arrived in Portugal. So if somebody wants to start pushing their limits, like they really want to start seeing if they could challenge themselves in all these, like we've talked about the body areas, like that climbing and the cycling, but also about asking for money, like all of that. Where would you suggest that they start? Like what would be a good way of getting going, of actually pushing those limits?
Well, for me, the first thing that I do is choosing what I want to do, like knowing exactly where I'm heading. It's either going to be climb a mountain or raise this amount of money or write a book or something, but like have that pretty clear. And then from there, just start taking a small choice or make small choices every day. Like I always say, like if we get rid of time, it doesn't matter if it takes 5 years, 10 years, but we got to make those small choices every day that we know it's going to take us towards where we want to go. And sometimes you might be halfway there and say like, oh, maybe I'm not heading the way I wanted to go at the beginning. Now it's time to change tracks. And you can do that. It's okay. As long as it's fun, then go for it. Because for me, fun is the biggest factor that's the only thing I care about. If it's fun, I'm going to do it. Of course, sometimes you got to do things that are not fun, like asking for money or training hard or being uncomfortable. But you know that you have to do those things to get where you want to go.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, I wish you the best of luck. And I know you're coming through Sweden, so maybe I get to see you here as well. So let's exchange the cities you're cycling through in Sweden in the next month as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I'll add your info also so people can contribute or just check out your journey through Europe.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast, Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. I hope you have more space in your world now. If you would like to listen to earlier episodes, share with other people, or subscribe, please go to Spotify, iTunes, or visit katarinavalentin.com/wolf.